Hi, I'm Greg Speichert, Director of Hilltop Gardens at Indiana University, and today we're talking about compost. There's all different kinds of compost: hot compost, cold compost, fast compost, compost in a little bucket, and worm composting. Today we're going to concentrate on cold compost. One of your main components is weeds from your gardens. I think the most important thing to remember about weeds when you use your weeds is make sure they're not perennial. So you don't want to use like mint, you don't want to use roots from Canada thistles or some of the harder weeds that you want to get rid of, because they're going to actually root into your compost and grow. So we don't want to do that. So, and if you have one of those, just dry them out on the driveway for a while, and then you can add them to your compost if that's what you want to do. So we have weeds. The one thing about that, and you have grass clippings, we have leaves, we have some nice little leaves, some leftover leaves from last year, and then cocoa fiber, some pine cones. They all have a different component. And one of the things about compost is you need to balance the carbon, this part, you know, basically the fiber of your diet, with the meat part, the nitrogen bearing part. Because this is the energy source that actually allows compost to break down. Everything needs this, some nitrogen, to help break down this. So when you're going to read about composting, you're going to read about the carbon-nitrogen ratio, and some of that's really important, especially for hot composting, but it's not for cold composting. You can have just piles of this if you want, not a big deal. The other thing you can do is you can tweak your carbon-nitrogen ratio by just adding a little bit of Osmocote or some fertilizer, granular fertilizer, urea. You can water it with some water-soluble fertilizer. So any one of those things can bring your nitrogen level up. Add some bunny manure, or any one of the manure products, you can do that too. So let's kind of work our way through building a basic cold compost heap, and we'll go through that. Everyone always has a shovel and they want to use their compost with a shovel. Maybe after it's broken down, but when you first start doing your components, this doesn't go through grass clippings too easy. Okay? It doesn't make it through leaves too easy, and it doesn't make it through pine cones. So you want to work with a fork. Okay? We use a nice little hay fork they use. Some people call this a manure fork, some people call it a grain fork. What you want to deal with is this is just a closely tined fork, okay? And that allows you to just, see, it goes right in. Lifts it up, and it still holds it in place. So it's a nice fork for that. When you go to work your compost, you want to use a digging fork, okay? You can tell it because it's forged, it's got some weight to it. It's not a little thin thing. If you find something that looks like it just goes down into little toothpicks, that's not a digging fork, that's a hay fork. So you need a digging fork so you can actually get some work in there and really twist it without bending it to death. Okay? So you want a digging fork. So main thing is, you're going to need a couple of tools. Don't just use your shovel. Okay? Let's get to work. The one thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we have fairly coarse material at the bottom. And I like to have something that has green in it because we're going to be working with cold composting. And our bottoms of our bins, these are our nice bins, these are 5x5 bins we've made out of treated lumber. What we've done is we've left them open on the bottom so that the worms can come up and work through the system. So as it compacts, the worms will start to help break down all the material too. And we'll increase our worm population. So when we do take this out as compost, it'll either have worms or worm eggs in it, and we'll be adding that to our garden. So that's an important thing to do. You can do it on concrete if you want, but that's going to be more for hot composting where you're turning it all the time. Once we get the green part down, we're going to need something coarse, okay? So one of the things we want to use is, I'm going to use the wood chips, which has a medium texture of coarseness. Sifted ones. And just sort of get it. You're going to see some of it through, okay? It doesn't have to be absolutely like a cake where you have little jelly layers and stuff in between. We want it to kind of be more like a marbling, where there's kind of a mesh in between. And then we're going to add our next layer of green, okay? So we want to make sure that we have our nitrogens and our carbons balanced. We want to have all wood chips. So our next thing is to add some of the grass clippings. Now the one thing about grass clippings, if you've ever left these out, they tend to form a sheet. So we don't want them very dense, or we're going to have a problem. We're basically going to have a little plastic layer built into our compost. We're going to spread it out. And it's really high in nitrogen, so you want to spread it out. It's probably even better if you can dry it out, but I'll warn you, just because it's dry doesn't mean it incorporates any better, because once it gets wet in the compost, it's going to turn into a slimy little layer. So, you know, it does it pretty fast. Sprinkle it around. Looks like you're getting ready for St. Patty's Day in your compost pile. There, a little bit more. Okay. Now, because this will form a flat, gooey layer if we don't kind of loosen it up, we're going to add some pine cones or something coarse. Okay. So on the one you want to use is only white pine cones from the eastern side of a hill that only faces north. I'm just kidding. It can be any kind of pine cone. So there's no real relevancy to that. So that way you don't have to say, well, what kind of pine cones? Pine cones. You know, the ones off a pine tree. And you can see how coarse this is and crunchy. So this will allow the grass clippings to not mat down. Okay? And it sounds cool too. If you have kids, maybe have them in here jumping on it to kind of crunch it down. There we go. And a little more of the grass clippings. Just kind of making a pine cone grass clipping sandwich here. Get a little more worked in. Throw the twig in. We're going to put on another layer of the, you know, carbonaceous material. We're going to use these leaves. We're going to bust them up a little bit. Now these could be dried weeds. These, you know, it doesn't have to be layers of grass clippings, pine cones, leaves. It can be anything that you have, but you want to kind of alternate. We're kind of covering some of the things that would be difficult. Weeds are weeds. You can just stack those up in here. But get these done. Get the leaves down, because the leaves, of course, already mat. So we want to make sure that they're matched with something that's going to be coarse. So like the pine cones and the grass clippings, that way we can kind of have something that's going to counteract that kind of matting effect. So we're using some of the older compost to get it started, and the whole purpose of getting it started is like sourdough bread. It's already got all the microorganisms in it that it needs to start making compost. So we don't have to buy compost starter. We don't have to buy a Ridex or something. We can just add old compost to the system and get the whole system started. So it's kind of like when you take a friendship and make friendship cake or bread, you have the starter, and this is going to be our starter. Okay? So you just want to add it, or a little bit of dirt if you got some healthy soil. But if you don't, and you're new to gardening, buy some compost starter. It's a nice balanced mix of bacteria and fungi to help start the whole process. But once you've started it, you don't need it again. There you go. Unless your compost goes awry and gets really stinky. So that's that. Now we've got a layer, and you just keep doing that. You won't need to add any more starter. You can toss a little on each layer up above, that helps, but you won't need to really add it to the system again. You notice we still have the cocoa fiber left. Use this very sparingly. This is kind of like adding, this is worse than adding steel wool. It's like adding plastic string to your thing. This takes forever to break down. I pulled this out 3 years after I started compost and still had this usable as cocoa fiber. So use it sparingly. Don't just put in sheets of it, because you'll have sheets of it left. Okay, so if you have a little handful of it, great, toss it in. Make sure it's fairly broken up. But don't just lay down wads of it, because you'll have wads in a year or 2 or 3 still left. Okay? So basically you're going to end up with this after about a year, which is kind of nice. You know, good, easy to work stuff, about coffee ground dimensions. Okay? And you'll still have a few bigger twigs and stuff, but it helps add aeration to your soil. But they're fairly soft. Okay? So that's the dirt on composting. I'm Greg Speichert, Director of Hilltop Gardens at Indiana University. Thanks for watching.